The dust from the stagecoach wheels hadn't even settled when Josephine Gardner stepped down onto the wooden platform at Fort Smith, Arkansas, her silk dress already wilting in the September heat of 1878, and she knew with absolute certainty that she had made either the bravest or the most foolish decision of her entire 22 years of life. Behind her lay everything she had ever known: the marble-floored mansion on Beacon Hill in Boston, the servants who had attended to her every need since childhood, the carefully curated social calendar filled with opera performances and charity galas, the trust fund that would have kept her in luxury for the rest of her days, and most significantly, the engagement to Harrison Pemberton III, whose family owned half the shipping interests in Massachusetts and whose marriage proposal had been the culmination of her mother's life's work. She had walked away from all of it 3 weeks ago, leaving nothing but a letter on her dressing table that explained in careful, measured words that she could not marry a man she did not love, that she could not spend her life as an ornament in someone else's carefully constructed world, and that she needed to discover who she truly was beyond the expectations that had been placed upon her since birth. Her mother had probably fainted upon reading it. Her father had likely threatened to disown her, which he had made good on based on the telegram that had reached her in St. Louis, informing her in clipped formal language that she was no longer welcome in the Gardner household and that her accounts had been closed effective immediately. The reality of her situation hit her with full force as she stood on that platform, watching the stagecoach disappear down the rutted main street of Fort Smith, carrying with it the last connection to her former life. She had exactly $47 in her reticule, 2 trunks filled with dresses that were utterly impractical for frontier life, and no connections, no references, and no prospects in this wild territory that seemed as foreign to her as the surface of the moon. Fort Smith was nothing like Boston. The buildings were mostly wood, weathered and practical, with none of the architectural grandeur she had grown up surrounded by. The street was dirt, churned into a fine powder by constant traffic, and the air smelled of horses, leather, and something else she could not quite identify but suspected might be cattle. Men wore guns on their hips as casually as Boston gentlemen wore pocket watches, and the women she could see moving along the wooden sidewalks wore simple cotton dresses and bonnets that spoke of hard work and harder lives. A man in a dusty brown suit approached her, his eyes taking in her expensive dress and impractical shoes with an expression that might have been pity. "Miss, you look a bit lost. Can I help you find something?" Josephine straightened her spine, calling upon every ounce of the composure that had been drilled into her during years of deportment lessons. "I'm looking for employment, sir. I was told in Little Rock that Fort Smith was a growing town with opportunities." The man's eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline. "Employment? Miss, forgive me for being blunt, but you look like you've never worked a day in your life. What kind of employment were you thinking of?" It was a fair question, and one that Josephine had been asking herself with increasing desperation over the past several days. She had been educated in literature, art, music, and French conversation. She could plan a dinner party for 40 people, discuss the latest novels from Europe, and paint adequate watercolors. None of these skills seemed particularly valuable in a frontier town. "I can read and write. I have excellent penmanship. I can keep accounts, and I am a quick learner, sir. Surely there must be something." The man scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Well now, the schoolteacher position is filled, and most of the shops here are family operations that don't need help. There's always the saloon, but I don't think that's what you're looking for, and frankly, you wouldn't last a day. Let me think." He paused, his gaze drifting down the street. The Crossed Arrows Ranch, about 10 miles outside of town, was looking for someone to help with their books and correspondence. Owner is Zachary Xavier, came out here about 5 years ago from somewhere back east, built up one of the most successful cattle operations in the territory. He's a fair man from what I hear, though he keeps to himself mostly. Lost his parents to fever when he was young. Made his own way. Might be worth riding out there to ask. It was not much, but it was something. Josephine thanked the man and made her way to what passed for a hotel in Fort Smith, a 2-story wooden structure with a hand-painted sign that read, "Miller's Boarding House." She negotiated for the cheapest room available, wincing at how quickly her limited funds were depleting, and spent a restless night on a mattress that bore no resemblance to the featherbed she had slept in all her life, listening to unfamiliar sounds from the street below, and wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. The next morning, she arranged to hire a horse and buggy to take her to the Crossed Arrows Ranch, which cost her another precious $5 that she could ill afford. The driver was an older man with a weathered face who said little during the journey, but his eyes held a kindness that gave her some comfort. The landscape rolled past, all browns and golds under the September sun, so different from the green hills of Massachusetts that it might as well have been a different country. The Crossed Arrows Ranch, when it finally came into view, was more substantial than she had expected. A large main house built of wood and stone sat at the center of the property, surrounded by corrals, barns, and various outbuildings. Cattle dotted the distant hills, hundreds of them from what she could see, and several men moved about the property attending to various tasks. It spoke of success and careful management, which gave her hope that perhaps the owner might indeed need someone with organizational skills. The buggy stopped in front of the main house, and the driver helped her down. "Want me to wait, miss?" he asked, and there was concern in his voice. "Please," Josephine said, suddenly afraid that if this did not work out, she would be stranded here with no way back to town. She walked up the steps to the wide front porch and knocked on the heavy wooden door. For a long moment there was no response, and she was about to knock again when the door swung open to reveal a man who took her breath away despite her best efforts to remain composed. Zachary Xavier was tall, probably over 6 feet, with dark hair that fell just past his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. His face was tanned from hours in the sun, with strong features that would have been handsome even without the intensity of his gaze. He wore work clothes, a simple cotton shirt and denim pants, with a gun belt slung low on his hips, and there was a contained power in the way he held himself that suggested he was more than capable of handling whatever challenges this land might throw at him. He looked to be in his late 20s, maybe 30 at most, and there was something in his expression that spoke of someone who had seen hardship and come through it stronger. "Can I help you?" His voice was deep with a slight roughness that suggested he did not spend much time in idle conversation. Josephine called upon every bit of her training to keep her voice steady. "Mr. Xavier, my name is Josephine Gardner. I was told in Fort Smith that you might be in need of someone to help with bookkeeping and correspondence. I am here to inquire about the position." His eyes traveled over her, taking in her expensive dress, her impractical shoes, her carefully styled hair, and she could see the skepticism forming in his expression. "You came all the way from town for a job that might not exist, dressed like you were going to a church social." Heat flooded her cheeks, but she refused to be dismissed so easily. "I came from Boston, Mr. Xavier. I came because I needed a change in my life, and I was willing to give up everything I had for the chance to build something new, something real, something that was mine. And yes, I am dressed impractically because these are the clothes I own. But I assure you that I am perfectly capable of learning whatever needs to be learned. I have a head for numbers, excellent penmanship, and I am not afraid of hard work, even if I have limited experience with it." Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of interest perhaps, or maybe just surprise at her directness. "Boston, that's a long way from Arkansas." "Yes, it is." She met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away. He studied her for another long moment, then stepped back from the door. "Come in, we can talk at least." The interior of the house was surprisingly comfortable, with solid furniture that showed quality craftsmanship and an attention to detail that spoke of someone who cared about his surroundings even if he lived alone. He led her to a large room that served as an office, with a massive desk covered in papers, ledgers, and correspondence that looked like it had been accumulating for some time. "I am not going to pretend this is an ideal situation," Zachary said, gesturing to the chaos on the desk. "I am better with cattle than I am with paperwork. I have been managing, but it takes time away from the actual running of the ranch, and I know I am not doing it as well as it should be done. I need someone who can organize all of this, keep track of expenses and income, handle correspondence with buyers and suppliers, and generally make sure that the business side of things runs smoothly." Josephine looked at the desk, her fingers already itching to start sorting through the mess. "I can do that. I managed my father's household accounts for 2 years before I left Boston. It will take some time to get everything organized, but once systems are in place, it should run smoothly." The problem Zachary continued, his eyes searching her face, is that this is a ranch, not a boarding house in town. If you work here, you would need to live here. I have a small cabin on the property that was built for the foreman before he decided to move closer to his family in town. It is basic, but sound. You would have your meals with me and the ranch hands in the main house. The work would be 6 days a week with Sundays off. I can pay $30 a month, plus room and board. $30 a month. It was a pittance compared to what she had spent on a single dress back in Boston, but right now it sounded like salvation. That would be acceptable. Miss Gardner. His voice was serious now, almost stern. I need you to understand what you would be agreeing to. This is not an easy life. The work is constant, the conditions are harsh, and you would be one woman on a ranch full of men. I run a respectable operation, and my hands know they would answer to me if they stepped out of line, but it is still not a situation that most women would consider appropriate. You come from a different world, that much is obvious. Are you truly prepared to give up everything you had for this? She thought about the question, really thought about it. Behind her was a life of comfort and security, of expectations and obligations, of being what everyone else wanted her to be. Ahead of her was uncertainty, hard work, and a future that she would have to build with her own hands. Mr. Xavier, I already gave up everything. I left Boston with nothing but my clothes and a small amount of money that's nearly gone. My family has disowned me. I have no prospects, no references, and no safety net. This opportunity, as challenging as it might be, is more than I had yesterday. So yes, I am prepared. I have to be. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. All right then. We can try this for a month, see how it works out. If it is not a good fit for either of us, no hard feelings. But I have to warn you, Miss Gardner, this is going to be harder than anything you have ever done in your life. I believe you, she said, and meant it. The buggy driver seemed surprised when she told him she would not need a ride back to town, but would instead be staying at the ranch. Zachary helped her unload her trunks, though his expression suggested he thought she had packed far too much, and showed her to the small cabin that would be her new home. It was a single room with a bed, a small stove, a table with 2 chairs, and little else. There was a pump for water outside, and an outhouse a short distance away. It was primitive compared to what she had known, but it was clean and dry, and right now, that was enough. Get yourself settled, Zachary said from the doorway. Supper is at 6. I will introduce you to the hands then, and we can start on the books tomorrow morning. After he left, Josephine sat on the edge of the narrow bed and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to feel the full weight of what she had done. She had given up everything for this, a chance to prove to herself that she was more than just a decorative piece in someone else's life, that she had value beyond her family name and her trust fund. Then she stood up, smoothed down her dress, and began the work of unpacking her trunks and making this small cabin into something resembling a home. Supper that evening was an education in itself. The main house had a large dining room with a table that could seat 12 people. Zachary sat at the head, and Josephine found herself placed to his right, with 5 ranch hands occupying the other seats. The men ranged in age from a young man who looked barely 20 to an older cowboy with gray in his beard, and they all regarded her with varying degrees of curiosity and skepticism. Zachary made brief introductions. This is Miss Gardner. She's going to be handling the ranch accounts and correspondence. I expect everyone to treat her with respect. The way he said it left no room for argument, and Josephine was grateful for the clear boundaries he was setting. The food was simple but plentiful. Beefsteak, beans, potatoes, and fresh bread. A woman from a neighboring ranch apparently came in several times a week to cook and keep the house in order, though she had already left for the day. The conversation around the table was sparse, mostly focused on the work that needed to be done the next day, which cattle needed to be moved to which pasture, repairs that needed to be made to fences and buildings. Josephine ate quietly, listening and observing. These men lived lives so different from anything she had known that they might as well have been from another planet. They spoke of things like water rights and grass quality, of horses and weather patterns, of the constant challenges of keeping a ranch operation running. It was a world entirely focused on practical matters, on survival and success measured in tangible outcomes, and there was something almost refreshing about it after years of conversations about social positioning and who had been seen with whom at which event. After supper, Zachary walked her back to her cabin. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that were so vivid they almost hurt to look at. "The hands are good men," he said. "They might not know what to make of you at first, but they will get used to it. Just keep your distance and focus on your work, and everything should be fine." "Mr. Xavier," Josephine said, stopping at her cabin door, "thank you for giving me this chance. I know I am not what you were expecting, but I promise you will not regret it." He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "We will see, Miss Gardner. We will see." The next morning, Josephine woke before dawn to the sound of roosters crowing and men calling to each other as they began their day. She dressed in the simplest dress she owned, though even that was far too fancy for the work ahead, and made her way to the main house. Breakfast was already laid out: eggs, bacon, biscuits, and strong coffee that was unlike the delicate tea she was accustomed to, but which she drank anyway, needing the fortification. After breakfast, Zachary led her to the office and the disaster of paperwork that awaited. "I'm afraid I have let this go far too long," he admitted, looking almost embarrassed. "I kept telling myself I would get to it, but there's always something else that needs attention on a ranch." Josephine rolled up her sleeves, a gesture that felt both practical and symbolic. "Where should I start?" "Wherever you think best. You're in charge of this side of things now." For the next several hours, Josephine immersed herself in the work of sorting through the chaos. There were bills that needed to be paid, some of them months overdue. There were contracts with buyers that needed to be reviewed and filed. There was correspondence from suppliers, from the bank, from various business associates, all of it needing responses. And underneath it all were the ledgers, where income and expenses had been recorded in Zachary's bold but inconsistent handwriting, with gaps and errors that would need to be corrected. It was overwhelming, but it was also engaging in a way that nothing in her previous life had been. This was real work with real consequences. If she did not get the accounts in order, the ranch could suffer. If she did not respond to correspondence, business relationships could be damaged. Her actions mattered in a direct and tangible way. She lost track of time, only vaguely aware of Zachary coming and going, checking on her progress. When he finally insisted she stop for lunch, she looked up to find that hours had passed, and she had made significant progress in organizing the papers into categories and priorities. "You look like you are in your element," Zachary observed, handing her a plate of food. "I am," Josephine said, surprised by how true it was. "This is exactly the kind of challenge I needed." Over the next several weeks, Josephine settled into a rhythm at the Crossed Arrows Ranch. She spent her days in the office, working through the backlog of paperwork and establishing systems to keep everything organized going forward. She created separate ledgers for different aspects of the operation, developed a filing system for correspondence, and began preparing regular reports that gave Zachary a clear picture of the ranch's financial health. In the evenings, she joined Zachary and the hands for supper, gradually becoming more comfortable with the routines and rhythms of ranch life. The men slowly accepted her presence, though they remained somewhat reserved around her, unsure how to interact with a woman so clearly from a different world. But it was Zachary who occupied more and more of her thoughts as the days passed. She found herself watching him when she thought he was not paying attention, noticing the way he moved with such confidence and purpose, the way he treated his animals and his men with equal respect. The rare moments when he smiled and his entire face transformed. He was different from any man she had ever known, genuine, straightforward, and utterly without pretense. She learned his story in bits and pieces, gathered from brief conversations and comments from the ranch hands. His parents had died when he was 16, leaving him with nothing but debts and a determination to make something of himself. He had worked as a hired hand on various ranches, saving every penny, learning everything he could about cattle and land management. 5 years ago, he had scraped together enough money to buy this land and a small starter herd, and through sheer hard work and smart decisions, he had built the Crossed Arrows into one of the most successful operations in the territory. It was a story of someone who had created his own life through determination and effort, and Josephine found herself deeply admiring him for it. He had not been given anything, had not relied on family connections or inherited wealth. Everything he had earned. One evening in late October, after the others had gone to their bunks, Josephine was finishing up some work in the office when Zachary appeared in the doorway. "You're working too late again," he said, though there was no censure in his voice. "I wanted to finish reconciling September's accounts," Josephine said, setting down her pen. "I think we can cut costs on feed if we negotiate better terms with the supplier in Little Rock. I have drafted a letter." Zachary came into the room, looking at the neat columns of figures she had prepared. "You have done remarkable work here. I knew the ranch was doing well, but seeing it all laid out like this, understanding exactly where we stand, it makes a real difference. I can make better decisions when I have this information." "That is what I'm here for," Josephine said, feeling a warm glow of pride at his words. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, which was unusual. Generally, he left the office to her during the day, only stopping by occasionally to check on things or discuss matters that needed his input. "Can I ask you something, Miss Gardner?" "Of course." "Why did you really leave Boston? I understand wanting independence, wanting to make your own way, but you gave up more than most people ever have. There must have been a deeper reason." Josephine set down her pen and considered how much to tell him. They had maintained a professional relationship over the past weeks, cordial but with clear boundaries. But something in his expression told her that he was asking not as her employer, but as someone who genuinely wanted to understand. "I was engaged to be married," she said finally, "to a man named Harrison Pemberton. His family was wealthy, well-connected, everything my parents could have hoped for. The wedding was planned for November. It would have been the social event of the season, 300 guests, a dress imported from Paris, a honeymoon in Europe." "But you did not love him?" Zachary said quietly. "No, I did not. And more than that, I did not love the life that marriage would have committed me to. I would have been expected to spend my days making social calls, planning dinner parties, serving on charity boards, raising children to fit into the same world I was trying to escape. There would have been no room for me to be anything other than Mrs. Harrison Pemberton, decorative wife and proper society matron." She met his eyes, willing him to understand. "I know it must sound ungrateful. I was being offered a life that many women would envy, but I felt like I was suffocating. Every day was the same, every conversation was prescribed, every action was judged against what was proper and appropriate. I needed to know if there was more to me than what everyone else had decided I should be." Zachary was quiet for a long moment, his eyes never leaving her face. "That took courage. Walking away from security, from everything you knew, with no guarantee that you would find something better. Most people would not have done it. Or maybe I am just foolish." "No." His voice was firm. "Not foolish, brave. There is a difference." He leaned back in his chair, and something in his posture relaxed slightly. "I understand more than you might think. When my parents died, everyone expected me to sell what little we had, use the money to establish myself in some respectable trade, maybe become a clerk or a shopkeeper. That would have been the safe choice, the sensible choice. But I wanted more than that. I wanted land, wanted to build something that was mine, wanted to prove that I could make it on my own terms. So I took the harder path, and there were plenty of times in those first years when I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake." "But you did not," Josephine said softly. "You built this." "I did. And you are building something too. Maybe it is not as visible as a ranch, but it is just as real. You are proving that you can stand on your own, that you have value beyond what your family name could give you. That matters, Miss Gardner. Do not ever think it does not." The moment stretched between them, charged with something that Josephine could not quite name but felt in every fiber of her being. Then Zachary stood, breaking the spell. "It is late. You should get some rest." "Yes," Josephine agreed, though she found she did not want him to leave. "Good night, Mr. Xavier." "Good night, Miss Gardner." After he left, Josephine sat in the quiet office for a few more minutes, her heart beating faster than it should. She was developing feelings for her employer. That much was becoming impossible to deny. It was foolish, impractical, and potentially disastrous for the new life she was trying to build. But knowing all of that did not make the feelings any less real. November brought cooler weather and increased activity on the ranch. Zachary was preparing to take a large herd to market in early December, which meant long days of preparation and planning. Josephine found herself working closely with him, going over figures, preparing documentation for the sale, coordinating with buyers. The forced proximity only intensified her awareness of him. She noticed small things, the way he pushed his hair back when he was thinking, the calluses on his hands from years of hard work, the rare laugh that seemed to surprise even him when something genuinely amused him. She caught him watching her sometimes, his expression thoughtful, and wondered what he was thinking. One afternoon in mid-November, a well-dressed man arrived at the ranch in an expensive carriage, asking to speak with Zachary. Josephine was in the office when she heard raised voices from the front porch, and concern drew her to the window. The visitor was gesturing emphatically, his face red with anger or frustration. Zachary stood with his arms crossed, his expression hard and unyielding. The conversation went on for several minutes before the man finally stormed back to his carriage and drove off in a cloud of dust. Zachary came into the office a few minutes later, his jaw tight with tension. That was Walter Harrington. He owns the ranch to the north. He wanted to buy the crossed arrows. Josephine felt a cold shock run through her. Buy it? But why? Because it is successful, and he wants to expand his holdings. He offered a substantial sum, more than the ranch is probably worth on paper. Zachary moved to the window, staring out at the land. Enough money that I could live comfortably for the rest of my life without working another day. But you told him no. It was not a question. She could see it in every line of his body. I told him no. Zachary turned to face her. He thinks I'm a fool. He said only an idiot would turn down that kind of money, that I'm letting pride get in the way of good business sense. He said money is everything in this life, and I should take it while the offer stands. What do you think? Josephine asked quietly. Zachary was silent for a long moment, his eyes moving over the office, the organized ledgers and files, the evidence of the work they had built together. I think money is not everything in this life. This ranch, this land, it represents something more than just financial value. It is proof that I can build something, that I can make a success of myself on my own terms. If I sell it for the money, what do I have? A bank account and no purpose. No, Miss Gardner, some things are worth more than money, and this is one of them. The words resonated deep within Josephine's chest, validating the choice she had made in leaving Boston. I understand. I gave up a fortune to come here, to have the chance to discover who I could be outside of my family's expectations. Everyone thought I was insane, and maybe I was, but I would make the same choice again. Their eyes met across the room, and the connection between them was so strong it was almost physical. Zachary took a step toward her, then another, until he was standing close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes. Josephine, he said, and it was the first time he had used her given name. These past months, having you here, working with you, talking with you, it has been the best part of my days. You understand things that I thought no one would ever understand. You see value in the same things I do. Her heart was pounding so hard, she was certain he must be able to hear it. Zachary, I feel the same way. I did not come here looking for this, but I cannot deny what has developed between us. He reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to step back, and cupped her face in his calloused hand. I am not a fancy Boston gentleman. I cannot offer you the life you left behind, but I can offer you a partnership, a real one, where your opinions matter and your work is valued. I can offer you a life where you are free to be whoever you want to be, and I can offer you my heart, if you want it. Tears pricked at Josephine's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sadness. I do not want a fancy Boston gentleman. I want a man who values integrity over money, who builds things with his own hands, who sees me as more than just a decorative object. I want you, Zachary. I want this life we could build together. He kissed her then, and it was everything she had not known she was looking for. Passionate but tender, demanding but respectful, a promise and a question all at once. She melted into him, her hands gripping his shoulders, feeling like she had finally found the place she was meant to be. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, because we have both learned that money is not everything in this life, but love and partnership and shared purpose. Those things are worth more than all the fortunes in the world. Yes, she whispered, yes, I will marry you. The wedding took place in late November, a simple ceremony in Fort Smith, with the ranch hands and a few townspeople as witnesses. Josephine wore a simple white dress that she had purchased in town, far less elaborate than the Paris gown that would have been her wedding dress in Boston, but infinitely more meaningful. Zachary wore his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his eyes never leaving her face as they exchanged vows. There was no 300-guest reception, no imported champagne, no orchestra playing waltzes. Instead, they returned to the ranch for a celebration dinner with their small community, eating good food and sharing stories and laughter. It was perfect in its simplicity, a reflection of the life they had chosen together. That night, in the main house that was now their shared home, Zachary carried her over the threshold and set her down gently in the bedroom. "No regrets?" he asked, and she could hear the vulnerability beneath the question. "None," she said firmly. "This is exactly where I'm meant to be." Their life together settled into a rhythm that was both challenging and deeply fulfilling. Josephine continued to manage the business side of the ranch, her organizational skills and financial acumen proving invaluable as they expanded the operation. But she also learned to ride, to help with some of the ranch work, to exist comfortably in this world that had once seemed so foreign. Zachary, in turn, learned to share his life with someone, to discuss decisions rather than making them alone, to value the partnership they had built. They worked together during the day and talked late into the night, discovering each other's dreams and fears, building a foundation of trust and mutual respect that went deeper than passion. In January, a letter arrived from Boston. Josephine recognized her mother's handwriting on the envelope and felt her stomach clench. She had not heard from her family since that terse telegram from her father, months ago. Zachary found her sitting at the kitchen table, the unopened letter in her hands. "Do you want me to stay while you read it?" he asked. "Please." With trembling fingers, she opened the envelope and began to read. Her mother's elegant script filled 3 pages, and as Josephine read, her emotions swung wildly between anger, sadness, and finally, a strange sort of peace. Her mother wrote that she had been devastated by Josephine's departure, that the canceled wedding had been a social disaster, that her father had been furious beyond words. But as the months had passed, as the scandal had died down and life had resumed its normal patterns, her mother had found herself thinking about the courage it must have taken for Josephine to walk away. She wrote that she had spent her whole life doing what was expected of her, marrying the man her parents chose, living the life that society dictated. And while it had been comfortable, she sometimes wondered what other life she might have lived if she'd been as brave as her daughter. The letter did not extend an invitation to return, did not offer forgiveness from her father, but it did acknowledge that Josephine had made her own choice and had the right to live with it. It ended with a simple statement. "I hope you have found what you were looking for, my dear girl. I hope it was worth everything you gave up." Josephine set down the letter and looked at Zachary, sitting beside her at the table, his hand covering hers in silent support. "Was it worth it?" she asked softly. "Did I make the right choice?" He squeezed her hand gently. "Only you can answer that." Josephine thought about the past months, the challenges and the triumphs, the hard work and the deep satisfaction, the loneliness she had left behind, and the love she had found. "Yes," she said finally. "It was worth everything. I gave up a fortune, but I gained something far more valuable. I gained myself, and I gained you, and I gained a life that has meaning and purpose. My mother asked if it was worth it, and I can honestly say yes, it was." Zachary pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I am glad, because I cannot imagine my life without you now." The years that followed were not easy, but they were rich with meaning and accomplishment. The ranch continued to prosper under their joint management. Zachary's expertise with the land and cattle, combined with Josephine's business acumen, creating a formidable partnership. They weathered droughts and hard winters, market downturns and difficult seasons, but they weathered them together, their bond growing stronger with each challenge overcome. In the spring of 1880, Josephine discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complex mixture of joy and fear. She had left behind the world of nannies and servants, of childcare handled by hired help while mothers maintained their social schedules. Here, she would be raising this child herself, with Zachary as a full partner in the endeavor. Their son was born in November of that year, a healthy baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's determined chin. They named him Thomas, after Zachary's father, and the boy became the center of their universe. Josephine discovered reserves of strength and tenderness she had not known she possessed, while Zachary proved to be a devoted and involved father in a way that would have been considered peculiar in Boston society, but felt perfectly natural on the ranch. The ranch hands, those same men who had been skeptical of her arrival, became protective uncles to young Thomas. They taught him to ride almost before he could walk, told him stories around the campfire, and showed him the value of hard work and integrity by example. When Thomas was 2, Josephine gave birth to twin daughters, Emily and Grace, who brought new chaos and joy to the household. The main house, once so quiet and orderly, now rang with children's laughter and the organized chaos of family life. Josephine sometimes thought about the life she would have lived in Boston, raising children to be proper society members, and felt nothing but gratitude that her children would grow up here instead, learning the value of honest work and the importance of building a life based on principles rather than money. As the years passed, the story of Josephine Gardner, the Boston heiress who had given up everything for a chance at a real life, became something of a legend in Fort Smith. Other young women, restless in their prescribed roles, would sometimes arrive in town, inspired by her example. Some of them succeeded in building new lives in the territory, others eventually returned to the safety of what they had known, but Josephine always made time to talk with them, to offer whatever guidance and support she could. Walter Harrington, the neighbor who had tried to buy the crossed arrows, made several more offers over the years, each time increasing the amount he was willing to pay. Each time, Zachary refused, patiently explaining that the ranch was not for sale at any price. Eventually, Harrington stopped asking, though he never quite seemed to understand how someone could turn down that kind of money. In the summer of 1885, Josephine's mother came to visit, making the long journey from Boston at the age of 60. It was the first time she had left Massachusetts in her entire life, and the first time she had seen her daughter in 7 years. Josephine was nervous about the visit, unsure how her mother would react to the life she had built, but those fears proved groundless. Her mother spent 2 weeks at the ranch, and Josephine watched as the rigid society matron gradually relaxed into something softer, more genuine. She helped in the kitchen, played with her grandchildren in the dirt, and spent long evenings on the porch talking with Zachary and Josephine about life, choices, and the unexpected paths that sometimes led to happiness. On her last evening before returning to Boston, she took Josephine's hands in hers and said, "You were right to leave. I did not understand it at the time, and I am ashamed that I did not support you. But you were right. You built something real here, something that matters. I am proud of you, my dear girl, and I am sorry it took me so long to say it." The words healed something in Josephine that she had not even realized still hurt. She embraced her mother, feeling the circle finally close on that part of her life. Her father never wrote, never acknowledged her existence after that first telegram. Josephine made her peace with that, understanding that some people were too invested in their own world view to ever see beyond it. She grieved the relationship they might have had, but she did not let that grief poison the joy of the life she had built. In 1888, when Josephine was 32 and Zachary was 37, they received word that Harrison Pemberton, the man she'd been engaged to marry, had died suddenly of a heart condition at the age of 35. His widow, a woman from another prominent Boston family, was left with 3 young children and a complicated estate to manage. Josephine felt genuine sadness at the news, not because she had loved him, but because it drove home how uncertain life was, how important it was to spend your days doing things that mattered. That evening, she and Zachary sat on their porch, watching the sunset over land that stretched as far as they could see. Thomas, now 8 years old, was teaching his 6-year-old sisters how to lasso a fence post. The sounds of their laughter drifted across the yard. Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had married him? Zachary asked, nodding toward the children. Josephine thought about it honestly. Sometimes. I think it would have been comfortable, safe, and deeply unfulfilling. I would have had children, but I would not have raised them myself. I would have had wealth, but I would not have earned it. I would have had status, but I would not have had purpose. She turned to look at her husband, this man who had given her the chance to discover who she truly was. I would not have had you, and that alone makes every other consideration meaningless. Zachary pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. You know what Walter Harrington said to me last week? He said he finally understood why I would not sell the ranch. He said he had watched us over the years, watched the family we built and the life we made, and he realized that some things really are worth more than money. Coming from him, that was quite an admission. We proved something, did we not? Josephine said softly. That it is possible to build a life based on something other than financial security and social position. That love and partnership and shared purpose can sustain you through challenges that would break people who only have money holding them together. We did, Zachary agreed, and we are still proving it every day. As the years continued to unfold, the Crossed Arrows Ranch became more than just a successful cattle operation. It became a symbol of what could be built when people valued integrity over wealth, when they chose to invest in relationships and purpose rather than just accumulating money. Young couples starting out would sometimes come to Zachary and Josephine for advice, and they always shared the same message: build your life on a foundation of shared values and mutual respect. Work together toward common goals, and never forget that money is not everything in this life. Thomas grew into a thoughtful young man who combined his father's practical skills with his mother's head for business. The twins, Emily and Grace, were bright and spirited, already showing signs that they would forge their own paths in life, unbound by the limitations that previous generations had placed on women. In 1892, Josephine stood in the office that had been the beginning of her new life, looking at the organized ledgers and files that represented years of work and growth. The ranch was more successful now than Zachary could have imagined in those early days, but that success had never been the point. The point had been building something meaningful, creating a life that reflected their values, proving that there were things worth more than money. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Zachary in the doorway, older now, but still with those storm cloud eyes that could see right into her soul. Reminiscing, he asked. Remembering. There is a difference. She moved to him, and he pulled her into his arms with the easy familiarity of years together. I was thinking about the day I arrived here, so desperate and afraid, with no idea what I was doing or if I would survive. And look at you now. Look at what you built. What we built, she corrected. I could not have done any of this without you. You gave me the chance to discover who I could be. You supported me through every challenge. You built this life with me. Everything I have, everything I am, it is because you saw value in me beyond my family name and my trust fund. Everything I have is because you chose me, Zachary said. You could have stayed in Boston, could have lived in luxury, but you chose this harder path. You chose us. That has made all the difference. They stood together in the quiet office. Two people who had each given up everything they had been told mattered, and in doing so, had found everything that truly did. The money Josephine had walked away from in Boston would have been enough to last several lifetimes. The ranch Walter Harrington kept trying to buy would have made Zachary wealthy beyond his dreams. But none of that mattered as much as what they had built together. That evening, as they gathered with their children around the dinner table, Josephine looked at the faces of her family and felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. Thomas was talking about his plans to study agricultural science, to learn new techniques that could improve ranch operations. Emily was sketching in a notebook, her artistic talent already evident. Grace was planning an elaborate adventure, her imagination boundless. "Mama," Grace asked suddenly, "is it true that you used to live in a palace in Boston?" Josephine laughed. "Not a palace, sweetheart, but a very large house, yes." "And you left it all to come here?" Emily looked around the comfortable but modest room. "Why would you do that?" It was Thomas who answered, his young voice serious. "Because some things are worth more than money. That is what Father always says." "That is right," Zachary confirmed, reaching over to squeeze Josephine's hand. "Your mother taught me that lesson, actually. She gave up a fortune for the chance to build a life that mattered. And in doing so, she found something far more valuable than any amount of money could buy. What did she find? Grace asked, her eyes wide. She found herself, Zachary said simply. She found her purpose and her strength. She found me. She found this family. Those are the things that matter, the things that money cannot buy. Josephine felt tears prick her eyes, moved by his words and by the truth in them. She had given up everything she had been told was important, had walked away from security and status and wealth, all for the chance to discover if there was more to life than what she had been offered. And she had found that there was so much more: love and partnership, challenge and growth, purpose and meaning, a family built on shared values rather than social obligation. Your father is right, she said, looking at each of her children in turn. I made the choice to leave Boston, to come here with nothing but hope and determination, and it was the best decision I ever made. Not because it was easy, but because it was real. Everything I have here, I earned or built with my own hands and mind. Everything we have as a family, we created together. That has value far beyond any fortune. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Josephine and Zachary returned to their porch, a ritual they had maintained throughout their marriage. The land stretched out before them, silver in the moonlight, peaceful and productive. Do you know what I thought the first time I saw you? Zachary asked, pulling her close against the cool night air. That I was completely unsuited for ranch life? He chuckled. Well, yes, that too. But I also thought you were the bravest person I had ever met. Standing there in your fancy dress, clearly terrified but refusing to show it, asking for a job you had no qualifications for, willing to try something completely outside your experience. That takes real courage. I was desperate, Josephine said. I am not sure that qualifies as courage. It does. Plenty of people in desperate situations choose the safe path, go back to what they know, accept what is offered even if it makes them miserable. You refused to do that. You took the risk, did the hard work, built something new. That is courage, Josephine. Never doubt that. She rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and grass and home. You know what I love most about our life? What? That it is ours. Every part of it. We chose. We were not following someone else's script or meeting someone else's expectations. We built this together, based on our values and our dreams. How many people can say that? Not many, Zachary agreed. Most people spend their lives doing what they think they should do, chasing money or status or whatever they have been told matters. They never stop to ask themselves what they actually want, what would actually make them happy. I think that is what I was running from, Josephine said thoughtfully. Not my family or my fiancé specifically, but the feeling that my life had been planned out for me before I was even born, and I had no say in any of it. I did not want to wake up at 50 and realize I had never made a single meaningful choice in my entire life. And now? Now I make choices every day. Some of them are hard, some of them turn out to be wrong, but they are mine. Ours. That freedom, that sense of agency, it is worth more than all the money in the world. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the vast Arkansas sky. In the distance, they could hear cattle moving in the pastures, the sound of the ranch settling in for the night. Walter Harrington stopped by again today, Zachary said eventually. He wanted to make another offer for the ranch. Josephine felt a familiar tension in her shoulders. How much this time? Enough to make us wealthy for 3 generations. Enough that we could move anywhere, do anything, never have to work another day in our lives. And you said no. Of course I said no. But he asked me something interesting. He asked what it would take for me to sell, what amount of money would be enough. And I told him the truth. There is no amount. Because money is not everything in this life. And this ranch represents something far more important than financial value. It is proof of what we built together, of what is possible when you value the right things. Josephine turned to look at him, this man who understood her so completely. Do you think he finally believes that? I think he is starting to. He said he had never met anyone who could not be bought, that everyone had a price. I told him that was because he had never met anyone who had something money could not buy. He looked at you teaching Emily in the garden today. at Thomas working with the horses, at Grace reading on the porch, at the life we have built here, and I think he finally started to understand. That must have been quite a revelation for him, Josephine said with a smile. Var. It was. He said he had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes, but he did not have what we have. He did not have a partner who truly understood him, children who respected rather than just depended on him, a sense of purpose beyond accumulating more wealth. He said he was not sure his money had actually bought him anything that mattered. That is sad, Josephine said, meaning it, to have everything the world says you should want and still feel empty. That is what you escaped from, Zachary pointed out. That is what you were wise enough to see before it was too late. You understood that the life you were being offered, comfortable as it might have been, would have left you feeling empty because it was not built on anything real. I was lucky, Josephine said. Lucky that I had the courage to leave. Lucky that I found you. Lucky that you gave me a chance when you had every reason not to. We were both lucky, was Zachary corrected. We found each other at exactly the right time, when we were both ready to build something real. That is not just luck. That is fate, or providence, or whatever you want to call it. As the years continued to pass, the lessons that Josephine and Zachary had learned became the foundation not just for their family, but for their community. They shared their story willingly, never pretending that the path they had chosen had been easy, but always emphasizing that it had been worth it. Their marriage became a model for what partnership could look like when both people were truly equal, when decisions were made together, when respect and love were the cornerstones of the relationship. In 1895, when Josephine was 39, she received word that her father had died. There was a formal letter from the family attorney informing her of the death and noting that she had been explicitly excluded from the will. She had expected nothing different, and yet the finality of it still hurt. Her father had never forgiven her for refusing to be who he wanted her to be, and now he never would. She grieved not for what she had lost, but for what had never been possible between them. Then she let it go, understanding that she could not change the past, could only move forward with the life she had built. Her mother came for another visit the following summer, older now and moving more slowly, but still with that spark of understanding that had developed during her first visit. She spent lazy afternoons with her grandchildren, telling them stories about Boston that made them laugh with their tales of rigid propriety and social complications. She never explicitly said she wished she had made different choices in her own life, but Josephine could see it in her eyes, in the way she watched Josephine and Zachary together, in the wistful tone when she spoke of how different things could have been. Before she left to return to Boston, she gave Josephine a letter. "Your father wrote this before he died," she said quietly. "He never sent it, never even admitted he had written it, but I found it among his papers. I think you should have it." After her mother left, Josephine sat alone in the office and opened the letter. Her father's handwriting was shakier than she remembered, evidence of his failing health, but the words were clear enough. He wrote that he had been angry for a long time, furious that she had rejected everything he had worked to provide for her. But as the years passed and he heard occasional reports about her life in Arkansas, about the ranch she helped manage and the family she had built, he found his anger slowly transforming into something he could barely admit to himself: respect, tinged with regret. He wrote that he had spent his entire life accumulating wealth and status, believing that these were the things that mattered, that these were what he should pass on to his children. But in his final years, looking back on a life that had been financially successful but emotionally barren, he had started to wonder if he had been wrong about what truly mattered. He wrote that he had never told her he was proud of her because his pride had gotten in the way, but that did not mean he was not. The letter ended with a simple statement: "You were braver than I ever was, choosing meaning over money, building a life based on love rather than obligation. I wish I had understood that earlier. I wish I had told you this while I could still say it to your face, but please know that you made the right choice, even if I could not admit it at the time." Josephine sat with the letter for a long time, tears streaming down her face. It was not the reconciliation she might have wished for, but it was something, an acknowledgement, an understanding, perhaps even an apology in its own way. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her desk, a reminder that sometimes people came to understanding too late, but that the understanding itself still had value. That evening, she shared the letter with Zachary, and he held her while she cried for the relationship that might have been, and for the father who had finally, in his own way, let her know that he understood her choice. As the new century approached, the Crossed Arrows Ranch stood as a testament to what two people could build when they valued the right things. The operation had expanded steadily over the years, not through aggressive acquisition or ruthless business practices, but through careful management, fair dealing, and a reputation for integrity that brought both customers and good employees. Thomas, now 20 years old, was preparing to take over more responsibility for the day-to-day operations of the ranch, having studied the latest agricultural and ranching techniques. He had his father's practical skills and his mother's head for business, combined with his own innovations and ideas. The ranch would be in good hands when the time came for him to lead it. Emily, at 18, had announced her intention to become a teacher, wanting to bring education to rural communities that often lacked access to good schools. Grace, also 18, had a more adventurous spirit, talking about traveling and seeing the world before settling down. Zachary and Josephine supported both their daughters' ambitions, understanding that the freedom to choose their own paths was the greatest gift parents could give their children. On New Year's Eve, 1899, as the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the Xavier family gathered together at the ranch. Friends and neighbors had been invited, and the house was full of laughter and music and the warmth of community. It was a far cry from the elaborate New Year's galas Josephine had attended in Boston, but it was infinitely more meaningful. At midnight, as everyone raised their glasses in celebration of the new century, Zachary pulled Josephine close and kissed her thoroughly, to the cheers and catcalls of their guests. When they broke apart, he raised his glass high and said, "To my wife, who taught me that money is not everything in this life, to love and partnership and building something real, to the new century and to all the years ahead of us." The crowd echoed the toast, and Josephine felt her heart overflow with gratitude and joy. She had given up everything for a chance at this life, and she had gained far more than she had ever dreamed possible. As the party continued around them, she and Zachary stepped out onto their porch, looking up at the stars that seemed close enough to touch in the clear Arkansas night. 20 years, she said softly. 20 years since I stepped off that stagecoach in Fort Smith with nothing but hope and determination. 20 years of building this life together, Zachary added, and I would not change a single moment of it. Not even the hard parts? Josephine asked with a smile. Especially not the hard parts. Those are what made us who we are, what proved that what we built was strong enough to last. They stood together in comfortable silence, two people who had each walked away from the lives they were supposed to lead and had built something far better in their place. The ranch spread out before them in the moonlight, prosperous and productive, a symbol of what was possible when you valued integrity over wealth, partnership over money, love over obligation. Inside the house, their children laughed with friends, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and supported no matter what paths they chose to follow. In the barns and bunkhouses, men who had been given fair pay and respectful treatment over the years celebrated the new century with the kind of loyalty that money could never buy. And on that porch, Zachary and Josephine Xavier held each other close, grateful for the chances they had taken, for the choices they had made, for the life they had built together. They had proven, beyond any doubt, that money was not everything in this life. Love was, partnership was, purpose and meaning and the courage to build a life based on your values rather than society's expectations, those were the things that truly mattered. As the celebration continued, late into the night, marking not just a new year but a new century, they remained on their porch, watching the stars and holding each other, two people who had found in each other everything they had been looking for, everything that truly mattered, everything that made life worth living. The new century brought new challenges and new opportunities, but they would face them as they had faced everything else over the past 20 years, together, with love and respect and the unshakable conviction that they had made the right choices. Josephine had given up everything for a chance at a real life, and she had found not just survival but joy, not just independence but partnership, not just freedom but love. And in the end, that was worth more than all the money in the world. That was everything that truly mattered. That was the life they had built, one choice at a time, one day at a time, one year at a time, and it was more valuable than any fortune, more meaningful than any status, more precious than anything that could be bought or sold. They had proven that money was not everything in this life, and in doing so, they had found everything that was.